Welcome to East to West, where we discuss current events, highlight global Christian movements, and discuss fine arts and entertainment from a Christian worldview. Our hope is that together we can grow in our knowledge and expand our perspective so we can get outside of ourselves and engage the world around us. I'm Elgin Adal.
And I'm Josh Benedict.
And today we'll be covering the humanitarian crisis in Myanmar, the global persecuted church, and the captivating film Loving Vincent.
In our pilot episode, we covered natural disasters in our focus segment, and we just wanted to continue to encourage people to pray and get involved and stay updated with the situations in Mexico and Puerto Rico and Texas and Florida. You know, there's still lots of power outages in Puerto Rico. They're not out of the woods yet. And actually, since the recording of our pilot episode, there's actually been a typhoon in Vietnam. That was the largest in the last 20 years. And Southern California wildfires are just rampaging California right now. So we really need to be praying for those people. We need to be looking for ways to give and contribute to the rebuilding, contribute just to rebuilding their lives. Obviously, you can follow us and like us on Facebook where you can get updates. We try to really promote different things that are happening in the world, global events, and how people are responding. So give us the like on Facebook. We'll have fun on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. Glad to be back again.
Oh, I'm glad to be back, man. We're just doing our thing.
That's right.
So our focus segment today, we're going to take a look at a current event in the world and just discuss the circumstances that are unfolding. Today we're focusing on the humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. And you might have heard of this, you might have not, but we really wanted to give you some background information on the country of Myanmar. It's also called Burma, but then give a little history of what has actually led up to this crisis. Some are calling it a genocide, and we'll actually go into more details on that a little bit later. But Myanmar is a country in Southeast Asia. It's got the capital named Rangoon, but it's a population of 55 million individuals, and there's a large, diverse ethnic breakdown in the country. But the two ethnicities we're going to be focusing on today are the Rohingya Muslims and the Rakhine Buddhists. They're actually both located in the Rakhine state, which is an individual state of Myanmar. It's one of the poorest states. And the Rohingya Muslims are a stateless minority. They actually don't have citizenship. They've long experienced persecution in Myanmar. And they practice a form of Sunni Islam. And they've lived in that region of the country for most of their lives. It's really interesting that the Rakhine Buddhists are the majority in that region, but they're also the majority in the country in terms of being Buddhist. Buddhism accompanies 87.9% of the country. Christians are 6% and Muslims are 4%. So they're clearly the minority in all aspects, the Rohingya Muslim. So give us some of the history of just this country and where it's been and where it is right now.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of our listeners and both of us as well don't really get too familiar with the history of the country, but you can really trace some of the ethnic tensions and animosity back to World War II, where the Rohingya fought on one side of World War II. They fought on the British side. And then many Buddhists on the opposite side, the Rakhine, they fought for occupying Japan. So it makes sense that, both sides are there's a lot of animosity there because both sides actually massacred civilians during the war. And so after the war, the British hoped to appease the Buddhist majority by decreeing that the Rohingya areas would become part of Myanmar at the time called Burma. That really did set off decades of discrimination between the two groups. And then after independence in 1948, there was a Muslim rebellion in the northwestern corner of the Rakhine state. And they wanted to join East Pakistan because their ethnic background is more closely associated with them than with the Burmese people or the people of Myanmar, which do not share the same language. In fact, the Rohingyas are different. They don't even speak Burmese. They speak a dialect of Bengali spoken on the other side of the border in Bangladesh. So a majority of the Burmese people see those people as illegals. And even though that's probably unfair because most of them have been living in the Rakhine area for a very long time. Although Myanmar has fair elections, they had a fair election in 2015, but the military is still the driving seat in the country with three important ministries in its hands. And, some of the things that the representatives are able to do are kind of out of their hands because the military takes orders from its commander-in-chief and not from any elected official. And so that's like an overview of the history of where it led to something that really sparked off.
Right. What we're dealing with here is an ethnic tension, right? And so two ethnicities don't like each other. They haven't for a while, and this is what really sparked the situation. And so what it all started with is a group called the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, the ARSA. And this is a group a militant Islamic group that has been around for the last few years. No one's really sure how many people there are, when it actually was founded. The details are a little sparse. But what we do know is that back in October of 2016, they attacked 3 police outposts, killing 9 police officers. So this was not the first time that there's been tension.
Right.
But then back in August 25th, they attacked another police outpost, and around 12 police officers were killed. And that's what really sparked out the military that you alluded to, that is more so in power than anything, reacting in what some are saying is a genocide-like actions. They are slaughtering people. They are raping people. Some of these stories we're reading is almost too graphic in how it's very graphic in how they write about they're tying women up. They're raping them in a whole house.
They're doing all different types of things that are above and beyond, like you said, what they are really claiming to do, to be really trying to find out these radical people and try to bring them in. They're actually taking out innocent people.
Right. So there was supposed to be a reaction to the ARSA, but instead now what human rights groups are saying that the government troops actually just have one goal, and that's to wipe out entire Rohingya Muslim communities. We've seen from satellite images that 288 villages have been destroyed just in the month after the initial attacks on August 25th. And now there have been 646,000 people fleeing from Myanmar to Bangladesh as refugees. This is obviously a huge incident. What is happening right now on the global scale, LJ?
There's a lot of things coming out of this, and really the situation is being called an ethnic cleansing by the UN and the US. And we actually have a veteran investigator with the Human Rights Watch has called it a crime against humanity. So a lot of these kind of terms are being used to describe what's going on there. The United Nations officials called the campaign against the Rohingya a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. And that should just show you just how serious everything is, and some political things that are happening with different countries taking a stance on whether or not this, really is an ethnic cleansing. We have 2 of Myanmar's most important neighbors, China and India, have not joined the Western countries' condemnation of what's going on. And it's obviously because of political strategy. Because for China, Myanmar is important because it's access to the Indian Ocean. And then for India, it's important because it's a gateway to Southeast Asia. And so you have all this politics, involved, and you have the UN and basically trying to do something, and not everybody is fully on board, or there's just a lot of mechanism going on right now. But in Bangladesh, like you said, over 600,000 refugees have fled there. The UN Refugee Agency has actually deployed a lot of resources to Bangladesh, where the refugees from Rohingya, or the Rohingyan refugees are actually there, which is really good. 182 emergency staff in Bangladesh right now who are constructing a total of 8,000 bathrooms or outhouses for refugees, and different things they need just for cleanliness purposes, for clean water and everything, because they are becoming very overcrowded and they are undermanned by a lot. It's good that there are people helping, but we're talking about it before. They are, there's understaffing problems, and they're under-resourced, undermanned. And the last thing, if we're talking about the global response that's been going on for this situation, actually Bangladesh has this deal with Myanmar that if it turns out the conditions of the deal will be met, to return hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims to Myanmar, which would be devastating because these people are in serious, threat for their lives, and they would be just completely devastated if they had to go back.
Do they even want to go back?
That's the thing, is you're kind of forced out of your home. We talked about burning of your house and everything, and you lose everything, and then to go back, and your threat of basically your life is next. You've lost everything.
Yeah, why would I want to go back?
Exactly, and I think so. There's that, and so I think the Rohingya people right now are terrified. They're also experiencing a lot of the things that come with being a refugee in a new place, being displaced from their homes, losing a loved one, or many, like a whole family. And I can't even imagine, what it's like to go through that. So that's just kind of the overall crisis and what's been going on.
Yeah, I find the politics in this to be kind of interesting to me, just going aside from the genocide that's happening.
Right.
But politically speaking, I find it really interesting because here you have a group of people that, as you alluded to in the history, they kind of wanted to become part of East Pakistan. And so borders have been drawn in different countries by the governing authorities that don't really reflect the actual ethnicities that are being represented. So, the example I think of right now is in Spain with Catalonia, the region where they speak Catalan, and there was a lot of unrest recently in recent reports, and they're in a region where they don't even speak Spanish. They speak a different language, and so that's another example where ethnic tensions are rising. You see there's a religious group called Sikhs. The Sikhs are in a region in between India and Pakistan called the Punjab, and they've been wanting to carve out their own state.
Right.
There's the Kurds in Iraq. There's tons of examples like this. But going back to the fact that an ethnic genocide is happening right now, it feels like history is repeating itself, like Rwanda or Bosnia or Germany. So that's my biggest fear, is that it's when we look back on this. Yeah, when we look back on this, it's just going to be another stamp of what we forgot, what we missed out. And so as Christians, we have to care.
We do, yeah. We have to.
And so I don't know how you could not care just as somebody part of humanity. But as a Christ follower, you see something that's unjust, and it should break your heart.
And to take care of the people who are the refugee, the wanderer, the people that have lost everything. That really does speak to what you're talking about. We really have to care for the people. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what am I going to do to prevent the next Bosnia, the next, Nazi takeover? And basically, how can I protect these people that are completely innocent? A lot like me. If I was in that situation, it's just the fact that, we live in kind of a culture that's very much about ourselves,
Right.
And I think that to really, that's what we're trying to do with this podcast, is just to get people to become educated about what's going on, and so that they can really care about the people around the world and care about what's happening, so that we can, like you said, as Christians, help prevent the spread of just violence and brutal killing and things like that. And what we can do might not be as individuals as powerful, but I think that it does speak volumes when just one person, does stand up, and together, we form a very powerful, there's power in that.
Yeah. I think something for our listeners that they could do is just to let their hearts be broken when they hear about situations like this. I mean, you and I, as we did our research together, as we talked about this, it was hard to read, some of the things that are actually happening. So I think the first thing is to letting our hearts be broken. But then, like you said, humanity's selfish, inherently selfish. And so something that we can do is to look at ourselves and say, why couldn't this happen to us? I mean, we've even seen in the last few months
some persecution.
Yep.
For
some
maybe
tensions rising, race relations in the United States.
For sure.
Yeah, it just goes contrary to everything that the Bible's about, because we know that God doesn't show favoritism. And something that I was reading recently in 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 19, it says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them, and he has committed us to the message of reconciliation." And so with that, reconciliation is basically making peace in relationship with one another. And the fact is, as believers, we believe that we were enemies of God at one point because of the sin that's in our life. And God reconciled us while we were still sinners. He died. And so that's the beautiful thing about the gospel. And something that I sometimes forget about the gospel is I limit it to just my sins being forgiven, and not the fact that it reconciles me to God.
Right.
And it also helps to heal all of our relationships.
Yeah.
We have the ability to forgive others that have hurt us.
We have an immense power that we can really tap into when we get outside of what we see right in front of us and
Absolutely.
ourselves, right? Like the selfishness.
And so now that we're believers, we should be on mission to share the gospel, but also to be we can reconcile people.
Yeah.
We're hey, you are my brother, you are my sister.
Right.
God loves you. You're created in the image of God.
Exactly. As opposed to what we alluded to, the polarization is not what we should be focusing
Absolutely
on.
not.
Like drawing the lines in the sand. Instead, we should be looking for ways to unify each other, even though we might not agree. I don't think that every person, agrees with, we disagree sometimes. I mean, but I think it's deeper than that, right? It's looking at their value as a person. Things that have been going on in Myanmar have been someone looking at another person and not seeing a person.
Exactly.
Seeing an animal or a vermin to be exterminated. And I think that is obviously wrong, but it's wrong because of what that person means to God. We should really be doing what we can. I think for some action points that we should point to would be first to learn, right? To learn about the situations that are unfolding around the world. And that's what we try to do here with the podcast, is just to get the news out there, get some information out there for people. And then the second is pray, and there's no particular order, but really prayer is powerful and effective.
Absolutely.
It is putting your thoughts and your petitions to God, aligning yourself with his will. And if, God's will obviously is for good, when we align ourselves with his will, we're going down that path of, goodness, of righteousness. We're not going to be falling into our own kind of ways and everything like that. So let's keep our mind on the Lord. Let's keep those people in our thoughts and in our prayers. But at the same time, I think probably the most impactful way that you can do, like tangibly, and an action base that you can see, is donating and also participate. Find a way to get over there to Bangladesh. Obviously, it's hard for us.
It'd be great if an opportunity arose.
It would be great, and I think there's institutions and all these other things out there. But yeah, just really to be able to learn and become educated about issues that are going on like this, to pray, ask God to really be with those people, to really have those people on our hearts and on our minds daily, praying all the time for safety, security, peace, and for the people that are doing this stuff, that are actually killing. And then finally, just to donate, just to do something that really makes a tangible effort, and that you can see that really goes on. We talked about how they're understaffed and undermanned, and maybe being able to go and provide some help, either with your resources or with your time. So
yeah, you mentioned something just in passing that was really good, and it was to pray for the people that are killing. And that's something we don't always think about, is praying for our enemies, because they need Jesus. They need reconciliation just as much as the people that are being persecuted. So that's a fantastic point. And as we pray, let's also be praying for the Christians that are in Myanmar. There's 6% Christians in Myanmar. They have an opportunity to be those ministers of reconciliation.
Yeah.
And as they, we can go if we have the opportunity, that'd be great. But how great would it be for the Christians of Myanmar to be the ones that are helping to reconcile? And then what we can do is we can really be ministers of reconciliation here in our home country, and be those people that can bridge people and bring them to the Lord.
That's right. So our second segment, Full View, examines global movements within Christianity. Today, Josh is going to examine persecution of a global Christian church. So, Josh, what's your reason for doing this?
Yeah, I want us to look at persecution because I feel like it's a topic that is not often talked about. And I know you and I, LJ, we go to a school that very recently talked about persecution, so it's great that it's getting a little bit of light shed on it. But we know that persecution's not just limited to Christians, as we just alluded to in the previous in the focus segment with Myanmar. It's happening to all people of all different religions. But we specifically, because of you and I being believers, we want to focus on Christian persecution within the Christian community. It's not talked about that often, but it's talked about all throughout our Bible. So it's talked about in all four Gospels, and then even in the book of James, where Jesus is promising, he's not alluding to, he's promising persecution because of him. And so if we're following somebody who's promising that we're going to get beat up, killed, mocked, ridiculed in some form of way, I kind of want to know what's going on and why it's such a big deal. So that's why we're talking about it today.
Yeah. And so if you could just let everybody know, what is persecution?
Yeah, so this definition comes from Open Doors USA. It's a great organization that talks a lot about Christian persecution. You can find it online. But Christian persecution is any hostility experienced from the world as a result of one's identification as a Christian. Beatings, physical torture, confinement, isolation, rape, severe punishment, imprisonment, slavery, discrimination in education and employment, and even death are just a few examples of the persecution they experience, those being Christians, on a daily basis. And those are some very strong words in there.
Yeah.
And so I just want to just clarify and just let the audience know that we're not talking about people glaring at you when you say Merry Christmas and they want you to say Happy Holidays, or refusing to bake cakes for a wedding for a couple you don't agree with.
Relevant.
Although, yes, very relevant, and it definitely can fall under categories of passive aggressiveness, rude behavior, or even discrimination in some form or another. but it's not persecution at the level that definition was talking about. And so the World Watch List was actually just updated for 2018, and it listed North Korea, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan, and Pakistan as the top 5 countries in that order for that experienced the most persecution. And this comes from communist, post-communist regimes, Islamic oppression from government. It comes from neighbors, communities, families, for identifying with the name of Jesus. And each and every month, 322 Christians are killed for their faith, 214 churches and Christian property is destroyed, and 772 forms of violence are committed against Christians every single month.
That's crazy. I mean, hearing all of that stuff, there are people that are suffering for the message of the gospel. But what I would really what hits home for me is that, a lot of people I know, myself included, you think about persecution, you think about things that are happening, and you're like, I didn't think that this was supposed to happen to me as a believer or as a follower of Christ. You think, especially as a kid, when you're told that Jesus is going to protect you, he's going to be there for you always, no matter what.
Which is true, yeah.
Which is true, but it's hard to reconcile to people about like prosperity. That when you follow Christ, it's going to lead to blessing after blessing. If you're experiencing persecution, if you're experiencing a harsh life, is that a sign that you don't have true faith in the Lord? That you don't actually have Christ inside of you because your life isn't supposed to be hard. I think that's a completely wrong interpretation of the gospel message of what Christ was trying to say. And it's good to talk about and get out the truth of Christianity and following the Lord.
Yeah, we think that this idea of persecution can't be normal, but something from an article I was reading says, American Christians hear much more about prosperity than persecution, success than suffering, wealth and health than poverty and pain. Influenced by the general culture of optimism, many Christians, evangelicals and charismatics in particular, have developed a theology of success at the expense of a theology of the cross. And so exactly what you were saying, we raise our fists, we're like, this shouldn't happen. And I think to a certain extent we're right. It shouldn't happen. We should have these religious freedoms. But at the same time, it was completely promised in the Bible that it is going to happen. Maybe the form of prosperity that we go looking for isn't the form of prosperity that the Lord was promising. When we as Americans, we typically, I know you and I, we're like, let's do something. We got to be activists. We got to go do something. And we got to spread religious freedom. And that's not necessarily a wrong thing to do, but look at where religious freedom is most prominent in North America and Europe. And the facts are screaming at us that Christianity is dying in these places.
Yeah.
And that Christianity is exploding in the places where persecution is actually happening. I was reading The Insanity of Obedience by Nick Ripken the other day, and it has this great quote that says, "We are free because our freedom comes from God, not from our government. We need to start acting like we are free." And this really brings up this idea that we've been talking about, like, so where is our identity lie? Where is our true freedom? Am I allowed to talk about Jesus and the gospel because of the government rights that I have? Or am I free because Christ has set my soul free?
Yeah.
And so it's pretty safe to say that the best way to end persecution is just to stop preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a scary thought.
So the other thing to go off of what we were talking about earlier, with all this information, it'd be very scary and overwhelming, of course, anxiety inducing for sure. What do we do with all this information about the persecution and everything?
Yeah, we don't want to guilt ourselves down. We want to be aware. We want to be proactive, developing a theology of persecution and suffering by looking at the scripture to see what it says. We can read stories about people in the persecuted church in The Insanity of God, The Insanity of Obedience, on Open Doors USA's website. We can look at scripture. I think the biggest thing is we can be praying for perseverance for these people and the spread of the gospel, and just wondering if God has a bigger purpose than persecution, that maybe the persecution is actually happening to spread his kingdom. And then we can also just hold hands with our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted by proclaiming the gospel. These people are being hurt for proclaiming the gospel in obstructive situations, but we can do it freely and say, you know what, I'm going to take a stand.
That's what I was gonna actually go there, because how amazing would it be, reading David Platt's book Radical, how amazing would it be if the West, us here in North America, were on fire for God the same way that the people in those persecuted countries were, and we have no persecution here really, we have all of the freedom to really, and the platform to do some amazing things for Christ, but only if we had that passion, that fire that can only be experienced through that persecution. So the challenge through the book Radicals is really to try to get to that radical faith that causes you to be in jail or to die in order to give up your family or your possessions. And it's really hard to get that without having that persecution. I think that's why, the gospel promises it, is because that's where the refinement happens a lot of the time.
Right. And we just want to be clear to everybody. We're not asking people to be bold by looking for trouble or looking to be divisive. We'll let the gospel be divisive. It's divisive in and of itself. But to be wise as serpents but harmless as doves. And so exactly, we want to be bold. And I think the last thing is just making sure that we are part of the global church. We don't have to be ashamed for being part of the church. It's not the unpersecuted church and the persecuted church. No, we're just the church together. And so recognizing that there are plenty of Christians that are living in circumstances way different than ours. Maybe our circumstances aren't quite as normal as we think. Our last segment is called The Big Picture and looks at the entertainment world and how we can interact with it as a believer. Today, LJ is sharing about the beautiful and captivating film Loving Vincent. This film, LJ, really was beautiful. It covers the story after the death of Vincent van Gogh and follows a young man named Armand, who is actually a postman's son and is delivering a letter and trying to deliver this last letter from Vincent van Gogh's late brother to a worthy candidate, you could say. And it follows a fascinating tale. It's a fascinating movie. So tell us a little bit about it. This film actually flows perfectly into our global perspective because it really is a global film. So tell us a little bit about the film.
Yeah. And, before I go right into the film, I want to say my segment, which was really, we talked about covering the entertainment angle on what's going on just kind of broadly in the entertainment world, all around the world, not just in America, because I think we get a lot of American stuff because we're in America, obviously. But I really did want to get, for my segment, to be a spotlight on certain things that I think that people should really start to look at, from the arts. It could be anything from film to any type of piece of artwork, anything that can be considered art, which is a lot of things. But it's something I'm really passionate about, something I really like to get into, which leads me into, our topic for today, which is Loving Vincent. And you and me got to see this movie.
Yes, it was a lot of fun.
I want to hear just in a few words, what you really liked about the movie real quick, and I can talk about everything real quick.
I thought it was moving. It made me reflect on the meaning of life a lot, honestly, and artwork and how beautiful it can be. And it really made me think a lot about mental illness and how we can tear other people down. And so it was a really very moving movie for me.
Yeah, and that goes right into this movie. What I loved about this movie. It was a great film. It had a great story to it, but the passion of the filmmakers, Hugh Welchman and Dorota Kobela. See, this film was an indie film. It wasn't produced by a major Hollywood studio. It was produced overseas by the director and producers and writers were both Dutch, and also a lot of people worked on this movie from the UK. So the artists and everything and the actors all from the UK. So the overseas things that are going on over there, very exciting. And this is a very large-scale production with very good attention to detail. And it really did want to bring attention one of the most famous painters of all time, Vincent van Gogh.
And who was a Dutchman in and of itself, right?
Yeah, and who was doing paintings in Paris by the time. And this spotlight's kind of after, like you said, after his death, which was very mysterious circumstance. But the historical records say that it was suicide. He was a very depressed and tortured person as an artist. And this film really does do a great job of highlighting that. But it's been winning all sorts of awards. And, we're getting an Oscar season. Some of the best movies of the year have come out, and they're getting looked at. Okay, which one's going to be the best? And I love that, the buzz, it just really, it's really cool. But hopefully Loving Vincent can win as an animated film because it's an animated feature film, and it's the first ever feature film to be fully painted. And what they did was they shot the movie with the video, using video. And then what they had hundreds of artists who were good with the Vincent van Gogh kind of impressionist style, and they would oil paint over each frame, which is like a still shot of the video. So each video is a bunch of frames, and they were painted, and they used 17 original Vincent van Gogh paintings as backgrounds for the paints. And I think that was beautiful because it brought Vincent van Gogh's vibrant paintings to life in a way that's really never been done, because paintings are 2D, right? They're flat. You can touch a painting, and some paintings are really good with optical illusion, but never before has something been brought to life in this kind of way, as in a feature way, over an hour and 30 minutes plus, feature length film. So that was something I really great. Over 853 oil paintings were left over, because you paint over each frame, and that leaves you with you do thousands of paintings, but you're left over with 853, and 200 of those paintings were actually available at auction, and some of them are available online at Vincent Van Gogh or lovingvincent.com. You can still, I think, buy some of those. So that was some overall impressions and some great things that I really liked about the movie.
Yeah, tons of people went and invested in this movie. They worked really hard. So if at the very least you see the trailer, I would recommend seeing the trailer. You would really you'd get an understanding for what type of movie this is. And they incorporated tons of Van Gogh paintings and scenes. I know we would be sitting down and watching the movie, and you say, "Oh, there's a famous scene." And, everybody knows Starry Night, but not everybody knows.
Yeah, Starry Night's, I think, right in the beginning, and his self-portrait, I think, is at the end. It's beautiful attention to detail there. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit more about Vincent Van Gogh and what his life was kind of portrayed as, and then how that impacted you when you were watching.
It was for sure impactful, and I love I thought the story was secondary to the art, the way the art style was. I think that was the main draw of the film, so to speak, was how they recreated his style in a film, as opposed to just a regular painting like the paintings were. But the story itself was very captivating, and you saw some things. You peel the curtain back behind this very famous artist, and you got to see his life was very tortured. He was tormented. We talked about it. Obviously committed suicide by
very troubled man.
Yeah, but it goes behind that, because he was able to create, although he was very troubled, he was a rising star, among the most famous painters and artists during the time, and he was really lost his life at kind of the pinnacle of his rising star career, and it showed kind of behind his troubled mind, and like behind the scenes, like what was going on, what was really causing him to do that. But yeah, he was able to make such beautiful, vibrant paintings with vibrant colors, and we got to see that in a moving video kind of way. It was really, like you said, it was a unique experience to be able to almost feel Vincent Van Gogh kind of really leak out of this film in every aspect. And so it was very, very interesting to hear that side of his story.
Yeah, we as the audience were watching the art just come to life, and we knew he was a genius. And you could even see in the way the movie portrayed him, he knew he was a genius, but he didn't really achieve any sort of fame and success until after his death, which is why I think he was so troubled.
Yeah.
He felt alone and isolated in a lot of different ways.
Vincent Van Gogh lived a very misunderstood life, and we need to help people who struggle in our society to find acceptance. We see someone on the side of the street, and we can easily judge them and keep walking. In Van Gogh's case, he was kind of pushed to the edge, so to speak, by things that people have said to him, and his life experience not being loved as much as he should, or helped as much as he should. It makes you think about those type of people, and also what really makes you happy, because Vincent Van Gogh was able to see beyond his circumstance, because even though he was depressed and he ultimately couldn't really overcome some of those things that really pulled him down, he saw something deeper. And as Christians, we're called to also see something deeper as well, and there's a deeper reality. And we know the power of words is very important to this film, and also art as the gift of inspiration, God's gift of inspiration to mankind. You get that glimpse into that in this film. And lastly, we shouldn't be too concerned with how we will be remembered. Like you talked about, Van Gogh, he was concerned with how he was going to be remembered, but ultimately he did, in the letter that you hear at the end, he did think that it was enough to just be in his element, and to know that what he was doing was touching the divine, and was touching things that go beyond the physical limitations, or go beyond, the things we see around with our eyes. He was trying to touch the soul, and his paintings in the film really did touch the soul. And that's what really made me think of Christ, think of our understanding that way. And I think that's why I chose to cover this film.
We hope you've enjoyed today's discussion and found it relevant in widening your perspective and increasing your global awareness. Like us on Facebook at East to West. You can find details for the release of our next episode and the sources we used for this episode online as well. Thanks for listening. We're excited for this journey as together we start vital conversations that can lead to greater partnership in the global community.
Yeah, let's do it.